Ladies and gentlemen, also predictable. Omarosa, the dragging down of public discourse, the phony issues. My question for the media generally, are you happy with yourselves? Are you happy what you're doing to this society? The Omarosa media, the Stormy Daniels media. Here's the thing. None of these people on TV, on CNN or MSNBC, or writing at the Washington Post or Washington Times, and on and on and on, Meet the Press, none of them witnessed anything. These so-called reporters haven't witnessed anything. But they want to believe Omarosa. So they bring her on TV, or they debate her words, and then in some cases pretend they should be dismissed, but in other cases promote them. The president reacts, and of course they call him a racist. Now there are some people out there who are really quite remarkable. They don't think the president should react. They don't think the president should defend himself as a man, as a father, as a husband, and of course as a public figure. They think he should just accept it all because it's unpresidential to defend yourself. Just because Omarosa, whose career you made for 15 years and brought into the White House and so forth, just because you did all those things, you shouldn't be out there denying that you used the N-word. She says you did. You must have. Or that you were eating a piece of paper, or that you're mentally unfit to be president. This woman who you brought into your confidence, you're just supposed to sit there. Now, that's not normal human behavior. Isn't that why we detest politicians? Because you know when the door's closed, they are furious. But Trump keeps the door open, and he lets you know he's furious, and uses modern social media communications methods to tell the whole nation. And this woman was taping the president, taping other people at the White House, which is unethical, which is sleazy. And somehow the president should know better than to hire somebody like that. President should know better than this. The president should know better than that. President can expect some loyalty. He can expect people who use common sense. He can expect people who are going to be decent in what they do. The president didn't do anything. The book came out. A publisher wanted to make money, Simon & Schuster, from this book. This book has multiple lies in it, according to a number of people, many of whom don't even like the president, who said they never said these things, they never did these things. Omarosa is known to be unreliable, as best as I can put it. And yet here we are with the media. The media debating it, the media discussing it. She's on CBS This Morning. She's on the Today Show. She's on Meet the Press. And the media wonder why so many of us don't take them seriously. Now, I've talked about this before, but I think we got to go back. We need to have a debate in this country about the media, not freedom of the press. This isn't about freedom of the press. You know, I was thinking about this. The Washington Post Corporation is owned by Jeff Bezos, who's worth, what, $80 billion? Is somebody threatening the Washington Post? The New York Times, I don't know if they're still owned by, in part, by the Mexican billionaire who's worth $45 billion, the telecommunications king or not, but Washington Post, the New York Times is not threatened. I guess Comcast still owns NBC and MSNBC. Maybe I'm a little dated in this, but nobody's threatening their existence. Nobody. Michael Bloomberg owns the Bloomberg news outlet. These are not small operations. These are big operations, and they are owned by multiple billionaires, and they're not going anywhere. Anywhere. You got the Newhouse family, billionaires. You've got the Cox family, billionaires. The Boston Globe. The billionaire Red Sox owner, John Henry, bought it, as I recall, in 2013. U.S. News and World Report, owned by Zuckerman, a billionaire. Now, again, this could be dated. The Barbie family owns the Village Voice. Tribune Publishing, Patrick Soon-Shiong. These are all multi-millionaire, billionaire types. It was Carlos Slim Hula, as I recall, who owned a big chunk of the New York Times. Warren Buffett owns a whole bunch of, or did, daily newspapers. You can Google this stuff yourself. I Googled it today. These are major, multinational, many cases, corporations, these newspapers, cable outlets, local stations. You got to have a lot of money to own these companies. So, nobody's threatening freedom of the press in this country. This isn't China. As Thomas Friedman always loved China. It's not China. It's not Russia. It's not Iran. It's not North Korea. Nobody has stopped any of these media outlets from reporting, from speaking, from providing their opinions. None whatsoever. Now, competition has hurt many of them. They've had to figure out how to deal with new technologies, how to deal with the Internet, and, of course, one of the things they support is the nationalization of the Internet. Like many major corporations, they don't believe in capitalism and competition. They would just assume destroy them in order to protect themselves. There really is a feudalistic attitude when it comes to major media in this country. And so you have these so-called reporters and hosts that are on these various media outlets owned by these multi-billionaire and their corporate entities who pretend to represent the people, who pretend to point out the liars from the non-liars, that they're the referees. But that's a lie. They're not the referees. This isn't about freedom of the press. It's about what the press is doing. Not its freedom, but its actions. And this is something that we must continue to discuss. I'm not going to sit here and spend all day on Omarosa. I'll leave that to the other talk show hosts. They're very good at it, I must confess. The press today is not about preserving the press. And the reason we have freedom of the press is to ensure the survival of the republic against an overbearing government. But really today, the way these operatives, these hosts and these so-called journalists conduct themselves, they're not interested in that. They're interested in what? Promoting their own reality, promoting their own agenda. And by the way, notice how synthetic it is. Notice how superficial it is. And notice how similar one is to the next. One to the next. Is that freedom of the press? Now, I've talked before about these pseudo events that the media create or the media report on to the exclusion of others. These pseudo events, like Omarosa's book, is a non-event. It's irrelevant. Now, her taping in secure areas of the White House, that's a serious event, which gets very little attention, 10% of all the discussion. This is a pseudo event, as Daniel Boorstin would have put it. A non-event that has become a reality because of the way the media report it and promote it, and then turn it into an anti-Trump meme. That it's Trump's fault that Omarosa is there. That it's Trump's fault that she wrote a book. That it's Trump's fault that we have to debate this. That it's Trump's fault. Now he's a racist because he called her a dog. It's Trump's fault. And he not only called her a dog, he calls lots of black people dogs. And it's Trump's fault. Even though he calls white people dogs too, still, he's a racist. And here we are. Now, this isn't news. This isn't even the purpose of a free press. This is individuals who have these cherished positions, because there are not a lot of anchors on TV. There's not a lot of hosts, relatively speaking. Not a lot of news people on TV, relatively speaking. They use these cherished positions to claim that they are defending freedom of the press and advancing the cause of free speech by creating phony issues and phony events and insisting that they're news. More on this when I return.
Mark Levin.
This is why I often say the conservative intellectual movement, to a large extent, really is dead. There's a few here and there, but day in and day out, even smart conservatives on TV and with microphones and with keyboards live within the world that is created for them. I don't mean by the civil society. I mean it's created for them. They live by television news, radio news, and newspaper news every day, and this is how they spend their lives, regurgitating and then reacting. Now, we all do some of that. We must. But you got to take it to the next level and question this, as Borston calls these pseudo events in America. The Omarosa book is a pseudo event. The fact that it was published, the publisher makes money, she makes money. There's all kinds of allegations in there. It's now driving the news for 48 hours, 72 hours, 96 hours. But it's not news. It's a created event. It's simply not newsworthy. In the last half century, as Borston says, a larger and larger proportion of our experience, of what we read and see and hear, consists of pseudo-events, and Trump has it right. Fake news. We expect more of them, and we're given more of them. They flood our consciousness. Their multiplication has gone on in the United States at a faster rate than elsewhere. Even the rate of increase is increasing every day. This is true of the world of education, of consumption, of personal relations. It is especially true of the world of public affairs. A full explanation of the origin and rise of pseudo-events would be nothing less than a history of modern America. It's so true. Then came the news gap, historically speaking, became so narrow that in order to have additional news, quote unquote, for each new edition or each new broadcast, it was necessary to plan in advance the stages by which any available news would be unveiled. And so it gets worse and worse because of the TV or radio clock, because of the multiplicity of newspapers and so forth. Freedom of the press, we're told, is at stake. That was once an institution preserved to the interest of the community. Now it's often a euphemism for the prerogative of the reporters to produce their synthetic commodity. And yet, this is what they wrap themselves in, freedom of the press. Pseudo-events spawn other pseudo-events in geometric progression. We've talked about this. This is partly because every kind of pseudo-event being planned tends to become ritualized, with a protocol and a rigidity all its own. As each type of pseudo-event acquires this rigidity, pressures arise to produce other derivative forms of pseudo-event which are more fluid, more tantalizing, more interestingly ambiguous. Thus is the press conference itself a pseudo-event. In other words, the presidential press conference is a pseudo-event. Jim Acosta's there as a drama queen, trying to catch the president in some statement, looking for a word here or there, and that creates the news. The news creates the news, the unreality. As the press conference itself, a pseudo-event, became formalized, there grew up the institutionalized leak And as the leak becomes formalized, still other devices will appear. Now, of course, this gets a little bit more complicated, doesn't it? It depends who's leaking. It depends what their agenda is. The recipient of the leak, the so-called reporter, depends what their agenda is or what their focus is, and that becomes news. That's the news. Of course, the shrewd politician or the enterprising newsman knows this and knows how to take advantage of it. Seldom for outright deception, more often simply to make more news, to provide more information, quote unquote, or to improve communication, quote unquote. It's always for an altruistic reason, wittingly or unwittingly. Nowadays, the test of a Washington reporter is seldom his skill at precise, dramatic reporting, but more often his adeptness at dark intimidation. If he wishes to keep his news channels open, he must accumulate a vocabulary and develop a style to conceal his sources and obscure the relation of a supposed event or statement to the underlying facts of life, at the same time seeming to offer hard facts. Much of his stock in trade is his own and other people's speculation about the reality of what he reports. He lives in a penumbra between fact and fantasy. He helps create that very obscurity without which the supposed illumination of his reports would be unnecessary. A deft administrator these days must have similar skills. He must master the technique of denying the truth without actually lying. Speculation becomes news. Supposition becomes news. Supposedly, it is illumination of the news. It's no such thing. It's a pseudo event. More when I return.